Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 181. My name is NBZ and I'm here. I'm podcasting once again as we sit here awaiting the clocks to go backwards, Bally, and for us to once again lose hours in our day, which actually we gain an hour, I guess, if it goes backwards. But anyway, it messes things up. I'm joined by Bally. How are you, Bally?
I'm doing very well. Yeah, we get darker mornings. No, lighter mornings, darker afternoons. So it'll be dark in Edinburgh by about 4 p.m., which is great fun. And it's going to be like that until about March, February.
That's great. We just love it here, don't we? We just live in the darkness. We're born in the darkness.
It's for the farmers. That's why they do it. It's for them farmers. So,
are you a fan of this happening, Bally? Because I know that there's a contingent of the country who doesn't like it, wants it to change, and doesn't want it to go back and forward all the time.
There is no need for the clocks to go forward and back. You just have more light at this time of year and less light another time of year, and that's that. There's literally no point. I don't mind whether we stick to one or the other, but let's just stick to it. The idea that they go forwards and back is mad.
I shouldn't be surprised, Bally, because you don't like time travel, so this makes perfect sense.
I like my time vanilla. I don't like it. I don't like them messing around with it.
Oh boy, we should just have a podcast one day where I just go through a list of things and see like how many of them you just tick the vanilla box on. Basically, I have a feeling it'd be quite a lot.
It's funny though, because the one thing I don't like vanilla in. I'm not a big fan of vanilla ice cream.
That's crazy. I don't understand it.
The three main flavors, and I guess this is like a UK stereotype.
Yes,
so with strawberry, chocolate, and vanilla, I'll always side with strawberry and chocolate over vanilla. Always.
Vanilla's the king, man. You don't come at the king.
You like vanilla the most out of those three?
I do. I actually
That is
do.
interesting.
Yeah.
The tables have turned.
They have turned. Maybe I should be Captain Vanilla. Anyway, we've got anything but vanilla to talk about today because we've got a bunch of video games, a bunch of news, a bunch of emails, and Bally will tell you what we shall be talking about regarding all of those. Bally, how's it going to go today?
First segment, we're going to talk about the games that we have been playing. Second segment, we've got some emails. And third segment, we're going to have a little discussion about a new Nintendo policy. And that's their new limited time thing that they are doing on games. And that's obviously linked to the new announcement of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, which is...
Well done with the name there.
I wrote that down. That didn't come out of my head. And that is... an NES game that was originally only released in Japan but is coming to the West, and Nintendo are selling it exclusively on the eShop. However, it's going to be time limited. So we're going to have a little discussion about that and the whole issue.
Famicom game, Bally, please, not NES. Come on. Anyway, we'll get into that. But we will begin by talking about video games. So, okay, let's set this up. Okay, so...
Here we go.
So I'm on Twitter and I'm like, oh, Overwatch is going on free week on Switch. It must be like the anniversary and stuff like that. And I remember back in 2017, I decided on the anniversary event, because they were doing a free thing on PC, I was like, yeah, let's play this, give it a little bit of a try.
It was an anniversary event that got you into it.
It was, yeah, basically, because they had a free kind of play trial thing. It was 2 days back then, I think it was just a weekend. And I was like, yeah, the thing was originally with Overwatch was that it made me motion sick when I watched videos on Giant Bomb, and I was like, okay, maybe this isn't the game for me. And then I played it for about 40 minutes and I was like, this is one of the best games ever made. What have I been doing with my life? So yeah, and then I played Overwatch forever and ever, and I have like 300, 200 hours in PC, and I play it forever. And it came out on Switch last year, and I was like, yeah, I should play this at some point. And I was like, Bally, this might be a good way for you to get into it. And you always seemed like, whatever, like I've got too many games to play. I'm not going to go and have a look at this other game.
You got to see that
it's not really a commitment. It's like a lifestyle, right?
Well, when commitment becomes lifestyle. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I was on Twitter and they were like, hey, it's a free week of Overwatch on Switch. And I was like, I tagged Bally being like, we doing this? And then you were like, oh, fine, I'll play this game. And now fast forward and Bally is an addict. It's like cocaine. He can't stop sniffing it. Walk me through your process with Overwatch, Bally, and how we got to this point.
I was always open to trying it. I do respect your top 5. I think this is your number 5 in your top 100 games of all time. So I'm always going to respect like your top games of all time. I got to at least give them a go. The ones I haven't played, of which there's a diminishing number at this stage, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So this was one of the big ones that I still hadn't tried. And you're right, it came to Switch. When it came out, I was just kind of like, it was on my radar, but there's a lot going on. I don't know. There's no crossplay, so it wasn't like I could just...
Let me ask you this. If I hadn't been there to say, play this with me, bitch, would you have done it? Or would you have just, like, let it just go over your head and just disappear into the ether?
I didn't see the announcement for the free week, so unless someone else had been like, oh, there's a free week of Overwatch that I saw on either Twitter or somewhere else, I probably would have missed it. And Overwatch would have remained on my list and I wouldn't have tried it. But the idea that you were like...
And that would have been a grave error.
That would have been an error. But the idea that you were like, it's free, so I can get it as well. We can both get it. We can try it out, and it's like it's the full game you can test out. It's not just like a few characters.
See, that's the dirty thing that they do, right? Is because they give you skins and they let you keep your unlock. So you unlock a bunch of shit. I remember doing this on PC. I was like, oh shit, I don't want to lose all the skins I got, so I might as well buy it now. And they obviously make it a lot easier by they put the game on 50% off, which I don't know if that will still be the case by the time this episode goes up, but it remained as 50% off even a few days after the free trial had ended. So
yeah. So I mean, I was always like, oh, it just looks like, it looks a bit like Splatoon, but it's got these very different characters, and the world was always quite interesting to me because it's a very strange world where it is like semi-post-apocalyptic world with all these heroes from different countries, and they all have their own lore and background, and then they've all sort of come together as this group Overwatch, and there's like Deathwatch, I think they're called as well, Blackwatch actually, and then there's this other group, and I really actually got into the lore having gotten into the game, and it was all just that was one of the things that I was like, I'm not so sure about this, and it didn't feel as comfortable in my mind as like a game like Splatoon. But ultimately, while the pacing is like Splatoon, the modes are actually incredibly simple. A bit like Splatoon, a lot of those modes are simple as well. So
yeah, to the point where Bally's like, are we playing tower control at the moment? I'm
it's literally tower control.
This is the payload. Yes, I guess you call it tower control. Yeah. Sure.
And Splat Zones is another one that's in this game where you go to a zone, you control it, and you defend it. It's very simple, but it works because of how diverse the characters are. And I really do think that this game, I've tried most characters, but there's still a ton to play. But I do think that this game is a good example of like easy to pick up, hard to master. I think that varies drastically depending on the character. So two of the characters I like playing the most, who I think are very tricky to master, are Winston and Hanzo. So like, I just love playing both of them. I love the idea that they have a steep learning curve, and I was like, sure, I could jump in, and this is me being anti-vanilla again, but I was like, sure, I could jump in and play the most vanilla character in each class. And while I still enjoy playing some of the vanilla characters, I wanted to have like my projects to like really get good at, and like Hanzo and Winston are definitely like those kind of projects. So yeah, I'm very much in at this point, and yeah, I think I've played 4 hours of each class of character, so I'm now up to 12 hours, and played 4 hours tank, healer, and damage character. So I'm very in, and there's a crazy number of characters. It is insane how many there are, and there's so many characters I've not even touched, or I've just tried in training mode but haven't like gone to the next step of trying them in a match, and I'm just like, I could spend an afternoon just with one character, learning them, getting good at them, watching videos how to get good with them, that kind of thing. I've already done that for like a handful of characters. I'm just trying to like pick out my favorites, and I can just see this like train of like the locomotion is going at this point, and I'm just like on that train, and there's a whole lot of gameplay there.
It's one of those things, when I first started, I was like, this is like 30 different games, right?
Because it really
each
is.
Character is so different that you can spend, like I've played Mercy more than most just video games, right? I've put more time into this single character in this one game than I do most video games I play, which is just stupid.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of the way it is.
Do you like the lore and the history of the world?
I appreciate that it exists, and I do like those cinematics and things like that, but it's not really tied into the game. And I think this is one of my skepticisms about Overwatch 2 is like, I find with shooters generally, I like the multiplayer, and I'm not as big a fan of like campaigns when it comes to those types of things. And so if they're trying to lean more into the story stuff, that's great. I just hope that there's more of it in there than just kind of boring map design and waves of enemies, because I think as fun as it is to play some of those limited time modes like the archive stuff when that happens, or even the Junkenstein modes, it is very much just like kill waves of enemies
on the side, very quite simple.
Yeah, and it doesn't have much interesting design to it.
Is your understanding that Overwatch 2 they are going for something more?
Yeah, so basically Overwatch 2 they have said, here's the weird thing about it, is it's supposed to let people who own the first game continue playing in the same player base, which means Overwatch 2 players and Overwatch 1 players, multiplayer-wise, will just be in the same bucket. All the maps that come out in the new game will be in the old game. All the characters that come out in the new game will also be in the old game. And so it's this weird thing where it's just mainly the single-player content they're focusing on expanding for the sequel, and I don't know, from what they've showed so far, it doesn't look that enticing to me in terms of, like, I've played the archive stuff, and that has a bit of cutscenes here and there, a little bit of dialogue sprinkled as you play through, but ultimately it's just like a long level as you fight waves of enemies, and then you get to the end and there's another cutscene, and it's kind of like, okay, well, this wasn't that interesting to play. I appreciate a bit of the story building, but aside from that, it doesn't feel as exciting or enticing as what the real core of the game is, which is its competitive multiplayer, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love the lore and I love the characters. That I agree with you. That stuff sounds like a little dry, maybe. And I would be, if Overwatch 2 is just, you know, the multiplayer focus with more characters, but then they release a bunch more cutscenes and this sort of thing that relates to their lore and stuff, that would kind of be more my cup of tea. I don't know. I personally love the idea.
Because for the most part with Overwatch right now, a lot of the storytelling is just done outside the game, whether it's in YouTube like cinematics or in comic books or in all these other different media that they have that exists on the periphery. Whereas in the game itself, like, you're just playing on these maps, and I guess some of the maps have a little bit of dusting of kind of character stuff thrown in there. There's little references and Easter eggs that you can find in certain rooms or in certain places, and obviously all the locations are based on locations that the characters are from and those types of things. But ultimately they're multiplayer maps, right? So they're designed for interesting spaces for you to move through and to pincer enemies and to like find routes to the back and stuff like that. And that's what you want really from a game like this, more so than the level is designed narratively, which none of them really are in that sense.
Yeah, totally. I love everything about this game. I've barely found a flaw. I think we identified one flaw was that when you're in a game, you can't like join someone in a game, and I think you can actually do that in Splatoon, funnily enough.
The one thing Nintendo got right.
One thing. I love that. So you get like the little Winston cinematic when the game starts up. I don't know if the game launched with that or not, but
I believe that was the reveal trailer when they first showed it off at BlizzCon.
So what I love about it is that there is this world where there has already been a ton of history, you know, and this is Overwatch reforming. Like, there's already a huge history to every single character, both like good and bad and in between, and interestingly enough. And I love the idea that they're all coming back together, and I appreciate this. This barely links to like all these characters coming together to fight in the multiplayer modes, because as you say, like it's like some Smash Brothers. There's good characters and bad characters all mixed together. They're fighting together, whatever. It makes no sense.
It's kind of like if you think about it as like a VR training mode or something that, you know, they're getting ready to reform, it's like Diva's jumping into her VR mission, which is fighting a bunch of multiplayer games against like AI controlled people. Yeah,
but the lore I really enjoyed, because a lot of these characters actually are like, you know, existing tropes and things, but they actually do them in a way that makes them feel unique to this world, which I love. Like a character like Winston is very similar to like a character like Beast from X-Men, who's the scientist Beast like character, you know, like these sorts of tropes. But Winston, separate to Beast, feels so unique in and unto himself, which I just think is fantastic. And like, there's so many characters like that, and you realize that this world went through a phase where each individual nation was coming up with like their own way to fight off the I've forgotten their
Omnics.
the Omnics. So then you have like the Crusaders in Germany, and I can't remember another country, but like each country had like their own way of fighting back these Omnics, which I just thought was really interesting. And then they reformed, and like the United Nations got involved, and I love all that stuff. I think that is like really hooked me on these characters, and like just looking up YouTube videos of the lore and how it all links together. I've been absolutely loving that, on top of looking up YouTube videos about how to use a character like a Hanzo or a Winston and really mastering them. So yeah, I'm very in, if I haven't said that already. And I think Overwatch 2, as much as you've said negative about it so far, is probably like in my top few games I'm hyped for going into like next gen, and we can see where that goes, whether it'll be 2021 or later. Or
I mean, obviously, like I'll probably get it and play it, but it's going to be the same game ostensibly. That's the interesting thing, right? Is we're at this moment in time with video games where, does a 2 really matter anymore? You know, there's never going to be a Fortnite 2, right? That's just not how that game works. It's just constantly changing, constantly updating. It's the same thing. Why would you make another one? Hell, the developers of Among Us just cancelled their sequel, because why make a sequel when you can just put what you were doing into the game that hundreds and hundreds of millions of people are already playing? It just logically doesn't follow anymore, which is why I think it's a bit weird that Blizzard are doing this with Overwatch.
I mean, I think sequels and 2s are still useful for marketing purposes, but I completely agree with you in terms of like mechanically how different are these actual games. And even Nintendo with Splatoon 2, it's like that's just an improvement on Splatoon 1 in a few areas. It's not really a new game in the typical sense, but
I think partially it helps with a console generation changing and things happening there. That probably helps to distinguish, well, like, okay, this Overwatch was built more for the ground up for this new hardware, and it's going to take advantage of it and things like that.
Right.
But you know,
yeah, I expect Overwatch 2 to be quite a good looking game, and even potentially won't be on Switch, but we'll see. I don't know whether that's something, I don't know what the Switch reaction has been like. That's an interesting question, actually. And the thing is with it is, I remember at launch some people were kind of skeptical about its performance, and look, like, it doesn't run as good as it does on other platforms. Like, it runs at 30. Some textures are embarrassing straight up. Like, you look at them and they're like just blurs on a wall, and you're like, how did they get away with this? But ultimately, that's not really why you're there. Like, as long as the game plays well, and I think it generally does, it's a good version. Like, I think it's a reasonable, like, you can deal with it version. And as someone who plays on PC mainly when it comes to stuff like this, I have found myself gravitating towards totally different characters playing with a controller versus mouse and keyboard, where, like, I play a bunch of Farah on PC, and then just playing Farah on controller feels awful, so I just haven't been doing that. Mainly I've been playing as Lucio, and Lucio is a character I barely even touch on PC, but I love playing him on Switch, and it's just kind of, it's given me a different approach. So even for me, as someone who has literally put hundreds and hundreds of hours into this game, I'm finding new stuff to appreciate about it, playing it on the Switch version. And of course, like, playing it handheld is just a dream. It's one of those things where I'm going back to Edinburgh for a week, and back when the pandemic was happening and I was there and I didn't have my PC, I was going through Overwatch withdrawals. I'm like, fuck man, I need to play this game that I always, like, it's my crutch game, where, like, I'm sitting down for an evening for an hour and I put on Kind of Funny Games daily on one monitor and I just play, it is the
get some loot
podcast
boxes
game, and like, I'm getting there. I'm like, I've got podcasts to get through. I'm going to play some Hanzo. Here we go. Like,
exactly.
Like, and one thing I do really like about the game, and you said that this is something they changed, was that for like quick play standard match, they now force you to have 2 healers, 2 damage characters, and 2 tanks. And I personally love that, because I think it just gives a fantastic balance to every single team, no matter what.
It generally just makes games better, because in the past, sometimes people just choose whatever they want to play, and so you get a team of like a Hanzo, a Widowmaker, a Tracer, like all these very thin, like, what do you call them? Frail characters in terms of their
glass
damage.
cannons,
Glass cannons, basically. And so if you're going up against a team with tanks and healers, you're just going to get fucking floored, because you don't have a way to heal yourself or to, like, kind of push back against that stuff. And so often, if you'd get into one of those games, you'd be like, well, I know we're going to lose just looking at the team comp versus the other team straight up. And so this kind of forcing people to do that, sometimes you will get games where you just get steamrolled, but for the most part, the quality of the matches tends to be a lot higher than in arcade, where you go and do quick play classic, where anyone should choose whatever the hell they want, and it's a lot less balanced, I guess.
I would say that's one more flaw, and this is almost like a flaw that they've created upon themselves by having so many characters, and that's that if you're going to have that mode where you are forcing people into those silos, which we're agreed in favor of, I do think you need a better balance between the number of characters in each category. Like, I do think it is a little... My impression is that one reason that people aren't as into healers, arguably, as damage characters is partly because there's a lot more damage characters than healers. So, like, I'm not saying having more healers would automatically fix the problem. I think people generally love just being the person getting all the kills, doing all the damage, you name it. But I do think...
Unless you're me, in which case, just, I will be Mercy all day, man.
Right. But... one thing I'd like to see for Overwatch 2 is like if they could have a few more tanks and healers in there and not just add, a lot of damage characters. Because I think there's like twice as many damage characters at least as healers. And then I think tanks are somewhere in the middle.
Well, so the interesting thing is that when the game first started, there were 4 categories. And one of them was called defense. And so defense was a category where it wasn't like... So damage characters were like Reaper and McCree and, Tracer and stuff like that, where it's literally just doing damage, versus defense, which was like, oh, let's put Torbjorn in here, right? Or Symmetra. Actually, Symmetra was initially in Healer, which made no sense.
I was going to say, the damage characters you outlined also have like a little bit of movement boost often, like the McCree dive or Reaper's like teleport and things like that.
But like mainly those characters are based around just shooting your guns, right? Versus Torbjorn, where like he puts down his turret and he heals his turret and stuff like that.
But Torbjorn has like no movement boosts or anything.
Exactly. And so like the characters were put into different categories. For some reason, Symmetra was in support, even though she doesn't heal, and then she was moved to defense. It was a bit of a mess. And she's been changed a bunch since then as well. But basically they decided, actually all these characters that are in defense, like I think Bastion was in defense, which doesn't make a lot of sense because he's like the most savage attacker there is. But like then they decided, we're just going to flatten it because it doesn't make like it's kind of arbitrary that we're making this quote unquote defense category. But like given that, I would actually like them to bring that back just because it would make queue times a lot shorter. Because say you're a Torbjorn player and you want to play Torb, you got to sit in the damage queue for ages to get just to play that character.
But how would you fit 4 categories into a 6-person team?
Yeah, that's the interesting part, is like figuring out the composition, right? Like it's a lot harder to do that. You're right. Okay. But
I do think in an ideal world they probably would have had equal amounts. If they knew with hindsight that they would end up with 3 categories, teams of 6, 2 of each type, I think they would have gone for equal numbers of each category. As you've said, the history of the game just kind of has led them to this kind of mishmash imbalance of having more damage characters than the other 2. And given that situation, they are actually in a fantastic place, and it's a very minor thing in the grand scheme of things. But as you say, if you want to play Torbjorn, you're going to get in that damage queue, and the damage queue is 2 to 3 minutes every single match of extra waiting time, which if you want a good Hanzo game like I'm up for, then it's worth it. But if you're just kind of like wanting to just try out a new character for the fun of it, I can appreciate that's maybe a bit much.
Yeah, totally. And that's like, for the most part on PC, I play the arcade quick play classic mode because I can't be bothered to wait in a queue if I want to play Ash, who I've been trying to play.
See, we tried that mode and I was like, I hate this because I'm just
well, I know and that's the difference between us, right? It's like you want the best vanilla experience, which is quick play, right? And I'm like, whatever, Well,
if I'm Hanzo and I get damaged, I want the ability to heal without going to like one of those points on the map, which I appreciate are like useful in arcade mode, I guess. But
totally. No, I get that. But anyway, Overwatch. We both bought it, by the way, on Switch. Obviously, we did. Fucking after a few days, Bally was like, I think I'm going to... Are you going to buy this? Am I going to buy this? Yeah, we're both going to buy this, and it just happened. So
I think £18, and I guess that's like, I don't know, $20, $22 it'll be. Yeah. For the amount of gameplay in there. I'm very pleased with the package, and I would highly recommend, if you're someone like me who's just kind of like, it's been on your radar but you've never tried the game and I've always waited for like the right system to play it on. I do think the version on Switch right now for £18, $22, whatever, is a really good option. Especially, obviously, you need Nintendo Switch Online, but I should say it comes with 3 months of Nintendo Switch Online.
Yes, forgot to say that.
I actually noticed I got an email with a code to give me the 3 months, so I need to put that into my Switch. It's not just automatic, apparently.
No, it is not. You need to add it to your current total so that then it pushes back your renewal date, basically. Because my renewal date was coming up in like December, I guess, and I was like, I guess I'm paying again for this, but I guess now I pushed it back even more, which is funny.
But I am very on board, and I am very much looking to Overwatch 2, even looking forward to Overwatch 2, even if that means I'm going to play it probably on like a Series X or something in the future. I don't know. We'll see.
And maybe they have cross-play, which means I'll just play on PC and that'll be fine.
If they do cross-play, but they make it controllers only, would you play with a controller on your PC in cross-play?
Probably not, no. Okay. I mean, like, if we were able to play together, I was able to use mouse and keyboard and you were able to use controller. Kind of what, like, Apex did, basically. When we played Apex crossplay, I was able to use mouse and keyboard and you were using controller and it was fine.
What do you
if
think
they do that?
Like, the decision-making process behind that? Because you were saying, like, COD, they decided that they didn't link mouse users with...
The thing with Call of Duty is I don't actually know whether with friends, if they enforce that. I think what they tend to do is if you are playing with a controller on PC, they will just match you into a instance on either PlayStation or Xbox, basically, because they want to give you more of a fair fight, you know?
Or what if like they did it for Overwatch, but we're like, okay, you can play with a mouse and keyboard, but we're just taking Hanzo and Widowmaker out of those matches. I think it would be fine, wouldn't it? Like, I don't know. I agree with you. Like, the sniping is the biggest difference it'll make for like those quick kills from a distance. That'll just
well, you say that, but like for me, playing Mercy on Switch is not as fun as playing her on PC, just because she is a character where you do have to switch a lot and be quite active.
Switch to her pistol, you mean?
No, well, yes, that as well. Using the D-pad to switch to a pistol is a pain in the arse. I literally do it with a flick of my finger on my scroll wheel on my mouse, so it's just like instant. But also just switching between characters, like moving my staff to different people to heal them and stuff like that. It's so much faster and more snappy on PC, which is just, that's going to be the thing, right? And I was talking to you about this, about how like playing on a controller just feels like none of this was designed for this. And once you become a PC player and you start playing on mouse and keyboard, you understand that like I mean, I guess people can play shooters on console, but it's just like, why would you ever do that? It just doesn't make sense, right? So yeah, it's still fun, but
that's where I'm very thankful to a series like Halo that kind of paved the way for console shooting.
Yeah, no, it's good that they exist on consoles. It's just like I never want to play them there because they just are inferior in every single way.
Apart from portability.
Exactly, and that's the reason why the Switch version is so valuable, because as I said, going to Edinburgh next week, I will still be able to play Overwatch, and that is all I need in my life, really. So, good times.
We need to get on some ranked when we get to level 25 is the other thing.
Yes, yeah, we'll do that. Cool, Bally, we also played another video game, The Last Campfire. So this is an interesting case of a game that was promoted a bunch in Nintendo Directs, came out and had the wettest fucking fart of all time, in terms of there were no reviews. There was like 3 people streaming it on day of release. I was like looking for people to talk about this game, and it was deafening silence just across the board. I was like, what is going on?
It's a huge developer as well. Hello Games was made huge because of No Man's Sky. Like, it's so shocking that it was not followed up more after that initial showing. Totally.
And I don't really know why, but anyway, we both picked it up, and we have both played through it now, and it's pretty neat. It's a cool little game. Bally, you played it on Switch, and then you told me it's a little framey on Switch, and I was like...
I said, if I had my MBZ hat on, I would say, this is framey and runs like shit, but because I played it with my Bally hat on, it was fine. But,
yeah, exactly.
I just warned you with my MBZ hat on.
Yeah, exactly. So you played it on Switch. I played it on the Epic Store. I picked it up there, and yeah. So this is basically like a almost Zelda-esque style game, except there's no combat. It's very puzzle focused. You play this little character who is their name Ember, or all these characters called Embers, and then your one is just called Ember. I don't understand. They don't make that very clear.
Good question. I know that they're all called Embers. I'm not sure if your character is called Ember. That is a very good question.
See the weird woman, the Welsh woman who narrates this game, who we can talk about.
Is she Welsh?
I think so. Oh my goodness, man. It's the most wild voice acting I've ever heard in my life, in terms of I don't understand that a person has a voice like this in reality.
It's hard to quantify, yeah.
The stranger was afraid. They couldn't see what lay ahead. The stranger spoke hesitantly. Is the campfire crowded? Let me gather myself.
Yeah, I don't know. So it's a really weird choice, right? Because I think this game could have been fine had it had like zero dialogue or narration or anything. It's kind of just like, it's one of those games that you kind of expect it to not have any of that stuff and just be...
I'm always in favor of a bit of voice acting if they think it works, but I agree this voice, they've clearly tried to go for like, what is something that is like from a fairy tale or, you know, Celtic tradition or something, and then someone said like, oh, Welsh would work really well, and then they've gone for like a very...
But it's not like just a normal Welsh accent. It's like with a weird kind of... I don't know.
There's like a very English accent in there as well, and it's like a very childlike voice, and the pronunciation on so many of the words is very unique that...
And like, not to dunk on this lady's voice or anything, but I don't know. It was just really weird, and it just
a bit jarring for the experience.
Very jarring, and took me out of it quite a bit. And I was like, I'm listening to these words, but I don't know that I'm understanding anything that is coming out of your mouth. Like I think just the sound of the voice was kind of overriding any interest I had in the story necessarily. It was a bit weird, But yes, how did you find it, like, as a puzzle game, as a kind of like adventure style, go through small diorama areas and do these mini kind of box puzzles?
Yeah, I think that, you know, if you like the kind of initial areas of Zelda games, where I mean like forested areas, this game definitely takes that and runs with it, as this like most of the game is like in a forest, or you've got like a bog and caves and cavey forests and that sort of thing. So I loved all that aesthetic. I think the puzzle wise, they are definitely on the simpler end of puzzles, and generally Zelda games are also on the simpler end of puzzles. I don't think Zelda puzzles generally get too challenging. Sometimes they can be a bit obscure. I think there wasn't really any puzzles in this game that were so obscure that made me go, I'm completely stumped. And I think most puzzle games, I am going to guides constantly, and I just didn't at all with this game, which is, in my view, a good thing. Like, I like it when you just kind of not, and at the same time, I didn't go to guides. I didn't breeze through it. There were still a few puzzles where I was like, this is tricky. I need to work out like how this links to that and so on. So it was the perfect level of difficulty for like a comfortable, you know, warm blanket of a game kind of thing. Yeah. I think that's what this game is really going for. I think that's why the cute art style, the cute characters, the cute story works so well with an easier style of puzzle game. And if you like Zelda games for the puzzles and the nice cute nature of a Zelda game, as which many of those games have cuter aspects, I would argue. Like, if you like those aspects of Zelda, this game is awesome. And it's one of those things that, as popular as the Zelda series is, both like critically and commercially, in the grand scheme of things, there's actually not a ton of like Zelda-like games in comparison to, say, Metroidvanias or these other things. And we've said this on the show before, but when games come along, and they're not few and far between, but there's perhaps fewer of them than you would think, considering how successful Zelda is. A game like Last Campfire, I think, it's immediately like on our radar. We're just like, we have to try it, and I do think it ticks all those boxes perfectly, and it's a very good game.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think we have different puzzle tolerances, as we talked about in the past, and this type of thing, where like I think Gorogoa is just phenomenal, and then I think you just got a bit frustrated with it. I think this game is a little rudimentary in terms of, I think of a game like The Gardens Between, where you solve a puzzle in that game and it feels fantastic because it is so fucking clever, but also there is a real satisfaction in understanding what you have done. Whereas in this game, I look at a puzzle and I'm like, okay, I know what to do here, I do it, right? Like, I don't think I ever had a puzzle where I was like, oh, how do I do that? Like, maybe I spent maximum a couple of minutes where I was a little bit stuck, but for the most part, I was like, got to a puzzle, I was like, yep, okay, do this, done. Okay, next one. Like, so the idea is you're going around this world and there are characters like you, other embers, I guess, who are frozen in stone, and you go into their hearts, and you kind of like try and get a flame from deep within their soul. And this basically, when you come to them, it changes to a different environment, and you're like in a little puzzle area. And so there are multiple of those throughout the game, and some of them, even close to the end, I was like, well, that was a bit basic. That took me like maybe 30 seconds.
I found some of the snake trains at the end particularly like
those were a little more complicated, but then I was also like, okay, how many times are we going to do the same mechanic again, right? Like they kind of lean a bit too much on the snake train and moving the snakes about with. But actually, one of the interesting kind of core aspects that you help to solve puzzles is there is this magnetic ability where the camera will kind of zoom to an above view, and you'll have this reticle that you can lock onto any magnetic object and start moving it around. And I thought like, oh, this will lead to some interesting kind of puzzle situations. And there was this one area with like a big lake, and there were a couple of boards on the lake, and you could move them with the magnesis thing. And I was like, oh, what if I like go down here? I bet there's a secret down here. And like, no, it was just a big lake with nothing.
I thought with that lake, the more enjoyable, interesting part was that before you get the magnetic ability, there's like a mini map that you can like move around stones, and those stones actually affect the world. I mean, it's very Zelda, obviously, but like
that, it reminded me of Skyward Sword's final dungeon. Yes,
exactly. I preferred that as a mechanic. And we should say, like, as much as you go into like these stone embers and regain their hearts and do those puzzles, there's plenty of like other Zelda-like puzzles in the overworld as well.
Yes,
which
there
I think are not like necessarily stronger puzzles, but a very different style of puzzle, which I enjoyed the combination.
Yeah, and I think like the reward for those are not necessarily that enticing because they are little notes of a journal, and I didn't find the story.
Yeah, the notes themselves are boring, but I think there are like some puzzles you have to do just to progress the world. So I mean, there's some really fun, like cool, weird looking characters. I love the weird pig who was like had a fire belly and like had some weird runes like that lit him up. Really nicely designed characters like the fisherman, the pig, like these birds. The turtle cook. The turtle cook was great. And it has kind of a bit of a twist ending, though you saw it coming as much as I didn't. But I think it's kind of neat what they do. Yeah, it's neat. It's exactly the kind of story I expected for this game, and totally, there are like darker tones to this game, which I enjoyed, and maybe those darker tones never went anywhere substantial, but like I think for what this game's trying to do, I think it really does it well. There's nothing new in this game in that sense, but it does a bunch of things that we personally really like, or I really like, that I think it does quite well. Like it's not hitting out the park. Somehow this year is like all about games with the afterlife, right? We've had Spiritfarer, we've had Hades, and Last Campfire is also like, hey, how about you move on to the next part of your existence, whatever that may be. Kind of deal is what's going on here. So yeah, I would say for me it leans a little on the simplistic side, but I didn't mind, just playing through it and enjoying it. It was very chill, cozy vibes, as you kind of mentioned, and I played it for a couple hours at a time. I think 5 hours both of us took around that time to finish it. And yeah, if you're not as bothered as I am by like frame inconsistencies on Switch, Bally, you seem to think it's a pretty good version of the game as well. So. Yeah, it's fine if you're not bothered by like, it's just that for such a simple game with such like small areas diorama. I mean, the areas aren't tiny, but like, it's this kind of game you would expect to run well. It just kind of doesn't in parts, but it's the sort of game that reminds me like, every game I play doesn't have to be like this stellar game of the year contender, and that there are lots of games that come out every year that are really, really good that aren't top tier, and it's games like this that remind me that I don't always have to play top tier games. I can get a lot of enjoyment, and Last Campfire is definitely in that category. Like, it's a really good game. It's just not like a great game that we often there's just so many games that by and large we often just talk about great games on the show, but I think there's really good ones in between that is definitely important to shout out, and I would recommend it. It's cool. Great. And then I also picked up Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2. So Bloodstained Ritual of the Night obviously was my game of the year last year, and I didn't know what to expect from that. I thought it might have underwhelmed considering like previous Kickstarter things like Mighty Number 9 and that type of stuff, but it turned out Bloodstained Ritual of the Night was fantastic, and I had a great time with it. However, before that game came out, they released Curse of the Moon, which was a 8-bit kind of pixel art style
I would say like going in the same vein as the classic Castlevania series of games, which means Castlevania like 1 through 4, the NES/Super Nintendo era, before it turned into, you know, the Metroidvania genre that it kind of has become today. And so that was really great. I really enjoyed Curse of the Moon, the original one, and it was very much pulling on Castlevania 3 vibes. Like the characters were from Castlevania 3. It kind of had that same branching path thing that was going on in that game. And so the sequel I was very interested in, because they were doing some weird stuff with it, right? Like they added a new character. One of the characters is a corgi who is in a giant mech. And so this mech character is really got a lot of HP.
Next character coming to Overwatch.
Yes, definitely. It's basically Diva, but a corgi.
Or Wrecking Ball.
And yeah, it's kind of has a bit of a floating hover, and then you can like smash down into the ground. There's another new character who has a spear, and so she's Dominique, who's also in Ritual of the Night. She's a character in that, but she has like longer reach but less HP. And then there's another character who literally just has a gun. Like in a Castlevania game, this dude just straight up has a rifle and he just shoots people with it. And he has even less HP, but his benefit is he can go prone, so he's like flat on the ground, and also he can crawl. So there are some areas where if you want to take a shorter path through the level and you have him still alive, you can crawl underneath a space and kind of skip areas that you might have had to go through otherwise. And obviously your main character Zangetsu, who's also from the first game, he's just like kind of medium health sword dude, kind of close range, kind of your standard character. It's a little unfortunate that there's no Miriam. Miriam's the main character from Ritual of the Night, and she obviously has the patented whip of the series, which there's no whips in this game, which is a bit of a bummer given it's basically a Castlevania game. And I have kind of mixed feelings about it, because I think I started it and I was like, this is kind of easy, not really being challenged that much, which is strange for a Castlevania game. And I should mention, I played on the more casual mode, I guess, more modern mode, which doesn't have limited lives and also doesn't give you knockback. So usually Castlevania games are infamous for, you get hit by a Medusa head, you're going to take damage, you'll also get knocked back, and sometimes the knockback will throw you into a pit, and that will just cause you to die instantly. So it's a much more modern friendly mode, like we're seeing these days with Crash Bandicoot being like, hey, there's retro mode, there's modern mode. And you know, for someone, you know, this podcast, we talk about how lives are stupid and we don't think they're very good anymore.
I think we're in a funny phase where they're going to keep both those modes, and then in a few years' time, I think they're just going to drop the retro mode, honestly.
Yeah, I think so. As soon as people start, like, aging out or dying out, I guess, of people who grew up with NES games.
They start dying. The people who believe in lives start dying out, yes.
Yeah, and Mark Brown did a really interesting video recently about lives and some ways in which they can have value, and you know, I found that
I was about to say I really thought some of the reasons that they were a good idea I agreed with, like they can add tension where it otherwise wouldn't be, which is nice.
But there's a point past which tension is interesting and where frustration is far more prevalent, you know? And I think Castlevania is a series where that is very clearly the case. So it was nice to kind of play on that. And so, like, I was going through it and I was like, oh, easy breezy, lovely, really good fun. And then I got to the point where I was just like, hey, fuck you, dude. And I was like, okay, all right, we're really going to be Castlevania 3. We're not just going to be pretend Castlevania 3. We're really going to give it to you. And so by the end, like, the last boss is just like, all right, we've got 2 phases and does a lot of damage, real hard to avoid attacks. But it was good fun, right? And I think, again, like, similar to Last Campfire, this is a game where, hey man, it's solid. It's if you like that style of game, you're going to have a good time with it. It's not changing the rule book. I mean, as interesting as it is to have a corgi in a mech who just stomps around and does stuff, that's more of like an aesthetic choice, I guess. Like, and it is interesting gameplay wise because you've never really played as a big, bulky, like, you know, melee brutal character in a Castlevania game like that before. So it does switch it up, and you know, the rifle guy is handy, but I think for the most part, I think the less HP on those other characters really makes them really frail, like too frail, and especially in a game where you take a bunch of damage when you get hit, it makes it a little annoying, because what happens is if one character you're playing as dies, then you reload at the checkpoint. You have access to the other 3 characters, but you don't have access to that character anymore. And so you're slowly getting to this point where you're like, okay, I've lost one character. Oh no, now I've lost 2 characters. I've only got 2 left. And so it's almost diminishing returns where there would be points where I lose someone in a boss fight and I'm like, I'm just going to kill all my characters in a row by jumping in a pit, to just refresh them all again so that I have access to all of them, because you can switch between them on the fly. Just tapping one of the shoulder buttons, you instantly change into them. Kind of like Genshin Impact, I guess, like just switching between characters. And so you want to make sure that you're balancing how much health people have. So if you're playing as Dominique with her spear and she only has 2 pips of health left, it's probably smart to just switch over to Zangetsu. I was going to say Zagreus. Too many Z names going on in video games these days. Switch over to him so that you have much more HP to deal with. And then when he gets low, switch over to your Corgi because they have a load of HP. So it's definitely a game where you want to be keeping an active eye out for that stuff, and you don't necessarily have to do that early in the game, which is why later in the game it's much more like, oh, okay, no, I actually do have to pay attention a bit more here and kind of get things going. But yeah, I was on sale again on Switch, and this is exactly the type of game you want to play on Switch, handheld and side-scrolling and good fun, good music, looks great.
Do you miss that D-pad, or are you just completely converted to those buttons?
I mean, I do miss it, but like at this point, I don't have a choice, right? So it is. I guess it is a form of Stockholm Syndrome where I'm like, you know what? I'm here. I guess I'm going to deal with it. I guess I'm going to like it now. And yeah, no, I mean, Bally, this is exactly the type of game where you would play it with an analog stick and I would call you a heathen for doing so.
There was some game I played recently on Switch, and I can't remember what it was. Well, maybe not that recently. And I had been converted to the fake D-pad. I was like, yes. I was using it, and it's kind of Nintendo's version of doing the whole Apple, you don't need a headphone jack anymore.
Yeah.
Have wireless headphones. It's Nintendo being like, you don't need a D-pad. You can have these buttons.
Man, I really hope that when they put out a new Switch or something, some iteration, they just put it back, man. Like, what is wrong with a D-pad? Everyone loves it. And I don't know these days how much people still play with split, especially now, because no one's seeing people outside.
I think that's the question: is do Nintendo want the next Switch, whether that's a 0.5 or the next Switch 2, to have the split Joy-Con thing? I mean, they already got rid of it for the Switch Lite, so maybe it's not in their grand plan for the next iteration.
That's true. There is a Switch out there that has a D-pad on it, so
yeah. The second they drop that, I think they'll. There's no reason why they wouldn't put the D-pad back there, but that's far too logical to assume with Nintendo.
Oh, yes. Never assume logic with this company. Cool. So yeah, that was Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2. Check it out. It's good fun. And yeah, that's going to close us for this segment. Don't worry, though. We'll be back after the break reading some of your emails that you have sent us. See you in a bit.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the second segment of today's show. It's the second segment, and that means it's time for your emails. We've got a couple lined up, but if you would like to send an email into the show, please send it to thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. It would be hugely appreciated. You can also leave a comment or a question in our Discord server. Link to that in the description for the show. Anyway, shall we move on to the first question?
Yeah, let's do it.
Our first email is from Louis, who's from Pennsylvania, who says, "Hey guys, love the show. I used to drive all over the state of Pennsylvania in the US for work, and your podcast made my drives much more enjoyable. I'm very impressed how informed the two of you are on so many different fronts of Nintendo. I wish I had as much time for video games as you guys do. I'm a die-hard Mario fan, and a fun fact about me is I own every single Mario game complete in box ever made. Yes, that's a lot of money I spent, no regrets. Really excited about all they are doing for the iconic plumber for the Big 3-5. I had two quick questions to ask you, and they are below. Feel free to answer me on here or live on the air, but it'd be cool to listen to your response on there. Well, here we are. Stay safe in this crazy world. First question. Do you collect anything video game related? If so, what's the rarest, most valuable thing you own?
Interesting. I don't think I have that much of interest. One of the coolest things I own is thanks to Bally, because he went to Japan and bought me a copy of Fire Emblem 6, the Japanese version, which I am very appreciative of, and it never came out here. And maybe it'll be remade one day, but I think that's kind of rare, probably, like a classic GBA Japanese-only game in some senses. But then I think most of my other stuff is Club Nintendo. So Club Nintendo had like limited physical rewards back in the day, especially during the kind of GameCube era and onwards. Then I got a Smash Brothers sound CD, I think. I have a nice plush Yoshi that I know you have as well, Bally, with like a little apple, which is a fun little thing.
It's really high quality. I love it.
Yeah, I think actually one of the problems with my Yoshi now is he's literally sitting right next to me, but one of his hands has come off the apple, and there's a little bit of red thread that's like coming out his hand. So he's a little bit worse for wear, but I'm sure I could like stitch him back on there and have his two hands placed on this apple here. But yeah, I can't think of any other. I think that there was a DS case that I had, like a kind of slimline slip case for the DS that I got from Club Nintendo as well. And there was also my cousins, when they had a Wii, they did some Club Nintendo stuff, and they got some of those notebooks that you could write in, so like Mario notebook and the Zelda notebook and stuff like that, which I think one of them they just gave to me because they didn't really care about it, and I was like, yes, I will take this exclusive Club Nintendo thing, even though it's just a random notebook. Yeah, I'm sure there's a few other things, but I'll probably have to have a bit of a think and see.
Yeah, we're not the biggest collectors when it comes to that sort of things. Personally, in terms of like games, I guess like one of the oldest, most renowned games that isn't the easiest to find is a game I own, like, I don't know, GoldenEye on the N64. I understand that's not the easiest to come by.
Really? Isn't GoldenEye like super popular? Like in the UK especially, I think GoldenEye probably sold pretty well and a lot of people owned it. I remember at our prep school, they had a GoldenEye in the
that is true.
In one of those
rooms.
rooms.
People having like the A button engraved almost into their thumb from playing that so much.
Yes, so many people were playing so much GoldenEye multiplayer in that place. Yeah.
But system-wise, like, I owned the original Game Boy Classic, like it was my first ever games console. And again, it was fairly popular at the time, so it won't be particularly rare. And then I guess like you after that, Club Nintendo stuff.
Actually, if you want to talk about interesting systems, right, because there have been so many special editions over the years of different consoles and stuff, and because we are generally like first adopters, we just get in there day one and get stuff. For the most part, I'm not going out there and buying like, you know, the smaller new 3DS with the faceplates or whatever, or the special edition X and Y Pokemon 3DS. But back in the day, I did own the special edition Pokemon Gold and Silver Game Boy Color, which was from America. When I went there and I bought it, it has a little Pikachu and a little Pichu engraved on it, but also in the light, it looks silver, and in the dark, it looks gold. Maybe vice versa. I'm not sure, but it was made in a certain way so that depending on what light you had it in, it would either look like a silver Game Boy or a gold Game Boy. And it is cool. Absolutely one of my favorite things that I own. Probably the coolest piece of hardware that I own.
The red power light is also Pikachu's cheek, which
yes,
is very
it is.
Cool.
Yes, very nice detail.
Very, very impressive. I can't think of anything else rare that I own. I mean, I've...
Any special editions of games? I think the biggest one for me is Fire Emblem Fates, and I mainly own the special edition for that game because it had one cartridge that had all three games in it, and I knew I was going to play all three. So for me, it was less about the art book and the poster and all the other things that came with the special edition. It was more the fact of, well, this is probably cheaper overall than me spending three different amounts of money for three different games that I'm going to end up playing regardless, and having them all on one cartridge was just too much to pass up. So that came with a steel book as well as the art book and things. I did an unboxing for it on my channel. So yeah,
this is a weird one, but I got like a special edition Mario Kart Double Dash, but looking back at it, it's actually a special edition that was essentially done by Game, which is weird. So like they did their
they made their own version.
They made their own box and with their own cardboard sleeve, and then I don't know how much I paid for it because it was my mum paying for it at the time, but like it's not a proper special edition by Nintendo or anything. It's just Game deciding, hey, we're going to make a bit more money out of people for Mario Kart Double Dash.
You do though have the special edition Zelda thing on GameCube, though, don't you?
That was pre-owned actually, and I think my mum picked up at Game as well. And yeah, so it's a double disc set. One disc is Wind Waker, and the other disc is Zelda Ocarina of Time Master Quest Edition, which has the normal mode in it, and then the Master Quest mode, which is much harder, which I have never even attempted.
Does it not also have Majora and the original Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, or is that a different disc?
That was a separate pack, and I never owned
okay.
it. Did Ali T own that?
I don't think so. No, he didn't have a GameCube.
Ali
Back
T
then,
never owned a
did he?
GameCube,
So,
of course. Yeah.
yeah, so that wouldn't make sense. But yeah, I think I also have a steelbook for Persona 5, just because that's what was at launch, so I just got it, which is nice. It's a very nice steelbook, and I like the idea of steelbooks, but the thing with video games now is, for the most part, they just sit on shelves, and switching out discs doesn't happen that often for me, because I don't play my PS4 that much, and with Switch, for the most part, this is a really annoying thing, which we can maybe get into an argument about at some point, but a website in the UK, Shop2, was doing digital codes for a really long time, and the digital codes were about the same price as buying a physical thing, and that's very rare here in the UK. Like, that never really happens. So I was getting Link's Awakening and Astral Chain and all these games digitally, and I was like, this is the future. I never have to buy a physical Switch game again. And then Nintendo in Europe decided to rule that these retailers can't sell digital codes for their games anymore, and they all just disappeared. And I hate Nintendo for doing that. It's garbage. It's really anti-consumer. It's terrible. I hate it. It sucks. But they decided to make that call, and I'm not a fan of it. So
it's like we're essentially losing £5 or so a game at least.
Well, the thing is, now I'm just tending to buy the games physical again. Like Paper Mario, I bought physical. So I'm very glad I got Animal Crossing before they changed it. Like, Animal Crossing was like right on the line of them changing it over, but I did get that digitally, which thankfully that did happen.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Shall we answer Louis' second question?
Sure, yeah.
They say, have you ever considered playing games with viewers off air? I think that might be something fun to do, since so many of us are home now because of COVID. Games like Mario Kart, Overcooked, Smash would be great to play with you two.
Well, good news. We have been doing this kind of on and off throughout the summer. We, in our Discord, have been holding... Well, we're going to do our second Smash Brothers tournament today. We played some other like non-video game things. We've done quizzes in that Discord as well. And some stuff. A lot of people in there have bought Killer Queen Black now, and so we're going to try and play Killer Queen at some point in time. So usually on some weekends, just keep an eye on the Discord or join the Discord, and yeah, we do play stuff with people.
Link in the show notes and on Twitter at TNL
yes,
Podcast. Or
yeah,
our
so
Discord. It's a great community. There's loads of discussions and chats going on under all sorts of channels with different topics. So it's not just online gaming; it's everything video game related and beyond.
Yeah, for sure. And I would like to do more regular streams just with community and stuff generally would be fun to do.
Yeah.
At some point we might make like a TNL Twitch at a point when Bally is able to stream. I don't know if or when that will ever happen, but maybe that will happen at some point. But that could be a cool thing
we
eventually.
Still haven't tried Among Us.
Yes, we haven't. No, that could be a thing that we could do as
or
well.
when Fall Guys inevitably comes to Switch or something,
Yes.
that might be a good one, or who knows.
Totally. Yeah. But anyway, yes. Cool.
Our next email is from Matt, who is from the internet. Hello, MBZ and Bally. A couple of podcasts ago, you were talking about third-party support on Switch and how the jump to next-gen consoles with PS5 and Series X will make Switch ports of games even tougher. It got me thinking, do you think there's any chance we'll see a return to handheld first games on the Switch or any other future portable consoles? From the original Game Boy right up until the 3DS, we would often see third parties support Nintendo's handhelds with unique games or different versions of games developed by completely separate teams. I'm thinking of things like the GBA Pro Skater games or Okamiden on the DS. I've got a real fondness for those titles that were developed with handheld in mind, but these days any game coming to Switch basically needs to be an optimized port like Doom, Fortnite, The Witcher 3, etc. With the power gap between Switch and next-gen consoles getting even bigger, do you think we'll see less ports and more unique Switch-first titles, or is game development too expensive these days to have multiple teams working like that? As mad as it sounds, considering the Switch is a handheld console by nature, I fear the days of handheld games may have died with the 3DS. There's a specific feel to those titles that I struggle to find these days in Nintendo's hybrid outside of their first-party output. As always, keep up the good work. TNL is my number one pod to make doing the washing up after dinner actually bearable. All the best, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. Is the number one compliment, making washing up more bearable, because we all know when I'm doing washing up, I have a podcast on constantly, all the time. Good stuff. This is interesting because I think we were talking before the Switch came out about how we were maybe worried that this would be the case, and I think it kind of has held true for the most part, which is games that seem developed for handheld in mind are not necessarily, or like smaller games that kind of fit into that mold, are not necessarily becoming a thing on the platform in the same way that, you know, third parties approached previous Nintendo handheld systems. And I think you could argue, right, that the 3DS, especially with Western third parties, was kind of sputtering and dying out even before the system was a thing. So
when we talk about like 3DS handheld focused third party games, it's very JRPG focused.
Exactly, and that's all from Japan for the most part, right? So yeah, Western third parties, as much as I remember that original 3DS press conference, and they were like, yeah, we got THQ on board, and we got Ubisoft making Assassin's Creed for 3DS, and we've got like Saints Row coming down, and I'm like, none of these things ever happened. Like, they were trying to tout they had all this Western third party support, and yet it didn't really, you know, appear on the system.
And while there were like quite a few third-party games a bit like that on DS, I wouldn't argue that many of them were that great. And like even to this day, I think the handheld focused experiences overwhelmingly have, the good ones have been first party, and I think the exception is, as you've said, like the Japanese RPGs that have been very good on 3DS. But outside of that, I don't think there has been like a sudden jump between 3DS and Switch. And you've got a game like Bravely Default 2, I guess, which is like coming to Switch. Like, could you argue that's kind of like a handheld game in focus in some ways, or Octopath Traveler? Like,
I don't know. I think that game is definitely you know, crutching on the style of the original Bravely Default game, and so it's just kind of just a continuation. But obviously, it has to look better. It has to be a bit more technically minded, just because the Switch has, you know, HD visuals and has the ability to kind of go on the big TV, and so it has to kind of blow up nicely and not look like a handheld game necessarily when you're playing it on the big screen. I think Octopath is interesting because it has a very specific style to it that you could imagine being, even like just looking at it, right? The sprites on a background, you can imagine the 3D on the 3DS working perfectly for an Octopath game. And so, yeah, that one is maybe one of the ones that you feel like, oh yeah, this actually does kind of feel like the kind of JRPGs that we were getting on the 3DS to some extent. But I think there's like the more specific thing that this email is getting at is, you know, GBA Pro Skater games or Okami Den. Like, these are pared down versions of already existing franchises that were made with specifically the Switch in mind, or the handheld in mind, which would mean like, oh, you know, instead of the next gen Assassin's Creed game, there would be a Switch Assassin's Creed game that was maybe more stylized, like, you know, in a kind of cell shaded style or something along those lines, and was made with a smaller scope and things like along kind of that idea. Is, I think, what is being gotten at here, and from that perspective, like, that just doesn't make financial sense anymore. You look at the way that the games industry has gone, and for the most part, it's the biggest of big games in the world and the smallest of small games. It is so rare to find a kind of mid-tier publisher who is putting out stuff that is kind of like, you know, not super expensive and not selling millions and millions of copies. They exist, but they're much smaller chunk of the market than they were back in the days of the GBA and the DS.
Yeah, and as radical as the Witcher 3 version on Switch is, it'll still be much cheaper to make the Witcher 3 into a Switch version than it is to literally make a ground up,
a brand new game,
brand new game essentially that's just called Witcher 3 for Switch, and
or the Switcher.
The Switcher,
You know?
There we go. And I think that would be the same across like publishers and developers. So I think it just makes sense. And I mean, for me personally, like a handheld inspired game on Switch that I've enjoyed is stuff like Link's Awakening and Octopath Traveler, as I've mentioned. And I think these are both kind of have very handheld roots, and I think it is just a case of looking to the big Japanese third parties like the Square Enix and Nintendo as first party for those experiences. And for me personally, that's fine, that's enough, and I don't need the Switch to have like all these kind of third party ports. And if I didn't own like other systems, I would absolutely play The Witcher 3 on Switch and give that a whirl. And Caroline had a great time with that game because she loves playing games on Switch. But I don't, for me personally, it's not like we're missing out on something by there not being a ground up new game of Witcher 3 on Switch.
Do you think we will be missing something though, right? Because I think what we're getting at here is the idea that next generation, when it rolls around, do the games become way too out there in terms of they're doing ray tracing and they're doing all these shadows and HDR and all these other things that obviously you can strip away when you put a game on Switch, but does the work warrant being done for those types of experiences to get onto the system?
The gap becomes too large, I guess.
Because the gap becomes too large, right?
Yeah,
and the question is, like, does Nintendo, like, step up the power in between at some point in the next couple of years to kind of catch up to that extent?
We talked about this before, but that's one thing I can see, like, the Switch 0.5 or a Switch 2 trying to do, is just to make sure that they're kind of still in and amongst the bigger players in terms of power, so that the disparity...
Like, be just powerful enough to where studios can justify making a low-res port of their game.
Like the Switch with Witcher 3. Like, it's just powerful enough to make that port, make it workable. And I agree.
Same with Overwatch as well, right? We talked about Overwatch in this episode.
It runs well. So, like...
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important that they keep a toe dipped into that market, because they never know when that market's suddenly going to become like a huge success. And I'm not saying like Doom and Witcher 3 on Switch are the biggest successes, but they're probably still an important market for Nintendo, when traditionally Nintendo have just had such a bad relationship with most third parties, especially in the last 20 years, let's just say.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? Is that games like Doom and Fortnite and Witcher and also Skyrim kind of change the narrative around the Nintendo console, because for the most part the Nintendo console is, it's traditionally for younger people, based on their first party output, and especially in the UK I think a lot of people are like negative about Nintendo because like, that's for kids, right? But when you have games that, not to say Doom is so mature, because like Doom is as cartoonish as fucking any Nintendo game, when you talk about, I mean, the violence of it is obviously very realistic and gory, but like it's also just stupid and dumb and video gamey. Mm-hmm. But people look at Doom and they think, that's a real video game, So I think just from a wider public perception perspective, those types of games being on Switch has changed the narrative around what a Nintendo system can be and what it can have, what type of experiences you can have by buying that system.
And what's interesting is you look back to launch of something like Wii U, and it was suggested that the third parties were really involved. Ubisoft was going to do all these things for the Wii U, and then
Reggie turned into a zombie face, man. On stage.
It just turned into the fact that Ubisoft delayed Rayman coming out just because they wanted it on other systems at the same time. And anyway, horrendous situation. And you would when you see the reveal trailer for the Switch and they do promote Skyrim on that system, and you think that's cool, but at the same time in the back of your head you're thinking, but Nintendo always kind of have like one or two big third parties on board at the very start of a launch system, a launch cycle. And then you think, but here we are like 3 years later, and we do have Witcher 3, we do have Doom, we do have these other games, and you think they've really actually stuck the landing when it comes to getting the third parties to stay interested and put their games on the Switch, on their Nintendo platform 2 to 3 to 4 years later. And that's just not been the case with 3DS, Wii U, DS. We are in a good place in that sense, even though these ports aren't designed with this sort of handheld focus that Matt has talked about.
Totally. And I do think about when we were younger and we were playing stuff like, I played Kelly something's surf
Kelly Slater.
game. Kelly Slater's surfing game on GBA, which is like analogous to the GBA Pro Skater games. And do you think about these days, the Tony Hawk remake, that's just probably going to be on Switch, like a less pretty version, but it will come to Switch at some point. Same thing with Spyro and Crash. There was a GBA Spyro game that we played a bunch, and you don't need to do that at the moment, at least with Switch, because the Crash trilogy and the Spyro trilogy can just be straight ported there. And, you know, understandably, they're not going to have as pretty visuals as the other systems, but the Switch is powerful enough to do that. And I do think that when it comes to those types of games, you know, Crash 4 even, if they do a Crash 5 on PS5, I feel like even that game, because its art style is, you know, at a certain level, you could probably keep putting those types of games on Switch as well and not really struggle too much. But I do think that we will eventually get to a point where, you know, these third-party developers might decide, okay, it's just not worth the work anymore, either because people aren't buying those games on Switch because they've moved on to next-gen consoles or something along those lines. But it'll depend, I think. And it also depends on how much resources you want to put into these different versions, because there are certain studios out there, developers, who have made their name on doing Switch ports, right? You look at Panic Button, or you look at Iron Galaxy, like these studios who are there doing the work to get these big games to run on the system, and people are very appreciative of that happening.
Yeah, and there are still like some really big cross-platform games that don't have Switch ports, you know, like Red Dead's,
yes.
Jedi Fallen Order, there's loads more. It's not like Watch Dogs and stuff, which doesn't have, like, there's these games that just like those studios just think for whatever. The Assassin's Creed games are a good example as well.
Right.
Like,
yes. I mean, they put the older ones on.
They put
Switch,
the older ones on, but I mean, they were on Wii U, so it's like, there's just certain developers that, and Ubisoft, I think, generally have a very. They're like, right, if we're doing something for Nintendo, we're going to go whole hog and do the whole Rabbids thing, right? But then when it comes to their mainline Watch Dogs, Assassin's Creed, they're like, yeah, we're not touching Switch with that stuff.
And I think the similarity with all those games you talked about is that they are the highest budget open world experiences available. And so doing the work on games like that, obviously Witcher 3 is like a weird anomaly, but you know, a game like Doom is much more of a pared down linear experience that, you know, still looks really good, but I think it's easier to get that thing running than it is to get Assassin's Creed Odyssey running, for example.
Yeah. And like, I think EA have an awful relationship with Nintendo, and they're obviously got the Star Wars license these days. So I've heard horrendous things about what they've done with like FIFA ports on Switch and all this. And it's hilarious because EA can obviously see the Switch as a big market, and they want their biggest games like FIFA on there in some form, but it's like in this really sort of scummy way just to make some money and not really putting a proper port of the most recent FIFA on that system, and that's just a shame. So if they were going to put like a Fallen Order, it'd almost be such a dumbed down version of Fallen Order, you'd fear that it might not even be that great. Who knows? But it's a weird position we're in.
It is, and I do kind of pine for certain experiences that were on the DS and 3DS that are just kind of absent at the moment, right? Like, there's no new Layton that has come out. They did do that phone one that then they ported, I think, to Switch, but, you know, according to people who know Layton, that thing's not very good. Phoenix Wright has been missing in action for a long time. You know, these types of things that defined even something like Rhythm Thief, right? Like, you think about that type of game would never get made these days, which is kind of a bummer, because I really do like those like smaller, kind of clearly budgeted for a handheld type experiences. Yeah, WarioWare as well, and Rhythm Heaven even, you know, all these kind of those style of games have found it, I think, tricky probably to find a market on Switch. And I think part of the problem is that now you're not just competing with other handheld style games, you're competing with Overwatch and Witcher 3 and Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild. Like, you're competing with these big games that for most people are going to be more appealing. So it is a lot trickier to just put out a handheld style game in the era of Switch, just because everything is being dominated by more impressive stuff that is already on the system. So yeah, it's a weird one. I definitely see exactly where Matt is coming from here, and I feel the same way in a lot of senses. And I do wonder if there is any way for those games to come back. And you know, when we talk about those types of games, for the most part, the indie side is carrying the load. You know, a game like Wargroove is the type of thing that's like, that's a handheld game. Like, of course it is. And that's made by a small independent team. So that is kind of where we look to, I think, these days for those types of experiences. something like Celeste feels like a perfect handheld game, or
Yeah,
even
yeah.
Hades at this point, so
Yeah.
so those have kind of just taken over what we formerly thought of as, those ones that we had on our portable consoles. So.
Yes, totally. Yeah, good question, Matt. Thanks very much for that. And if you would like to send an email to this show, please email thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. As I said before, you can also post in our Discord server. It's a fun place to hang out and join the community. But that's all we've got time for the second segment. Join us after the break, where we're going to talk about some of Nintendo's less good, perhaps, things that they're doing at the moment, let's just say. So, yeah, we will be right back.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the final part of today's show, in which I'm turning into a dwarf. I don't know why, you Scottish dwarf. Maybe it's because we're talking about limited time things, and as we all know, dwarves are limited in their time. They will expire from the fantasy world at some point. I don't know what I'm saying, Bally. Hello, this is the third segment. We're going to talk about Nintendo.
I was just going to say, third segment, you love a rolled R every time.
Every single time. Every single time.
Not for the first segment.
See, Bally, see, now you've ruined the magic, because it's one of those things I always do but deliberately never call out, is that I always do it. And I know people will notice that I always roll that R very, very much so at the start. And now the magic is gone. I can never do it again, Bally.
This time, the rolled R went so far, it turned into a Scottish dwarf. That's why it had to be called out.
That's true.
So
that's true.
You pushed it over the line, not me.
I did. Man, I've undone myself well and truly. Just like, segue, Nintendo are undoing themselves with this latest policy from Nintendo. So, Bally, they've been doing this thing, right, where they put out Super Mario 35. They're like, oh yeah, this fun game, you can play it if you Switch Online. Everyone's like, great, love Tetris 99, let's play that. And then they're like, oh, by the way, it's until March 31st, and then it's going away. And people are like, oh, wait, sorry, what? And they're like, oh, Mario 3D All-Stars coming out, great, you can buy it. And people are like, yeah, we want this is great. They're like, oh, by the way, it's we're going to stop selling it on the 31st of March 2021. Please buy it now and don't leave. And then they're doing it again for a third time, Bally. They are selling the new old Fire Emblem game, originally released on the Famicom in Japan. The first Fire Emblem game, now translated into English, fully localized, and you can play what would I guess have been an NES version of it had it come out in the West at that point, on the Switch eShop for $6, $5.29, whatever it is.
And this game got remade on the DS, right?
Not only that, but I believe there was also a Super Nintendo version of it. Maybe I'm incorrect in that statement. Maybe I'm not, but I believe they also put out an SNES version, and
it's
then they also
the one with your main man Marth.
Yeah, your main man Marth, who me and you thought was a girl for years, as I think a few people did, as was mentioned in our Discord.
That was the one line they could have added to that reveal video that would have made us been like, wow, that literally is us in Smash
That
Brothers.
Literally is us. So maybe we should just talk about the game first, briefly, just give a setup to this conversation. So yeah, they're basically remaking the first Fire Emblem game by they're not remaking it. I'm saying they're remaking it by not doing that. They're basically just putting it out again, which is similar to what they did with Earthbound Beginnings on Wii U, right? Because they just took that ROM and were like, we've now put it in English. now you can play it. And that's kind of what they're doing here. However, it's not part of the Nintendo Switch Online service. It is a standalone product that also has a stupid, ridiculous special edition, because obviously Fire Emblem and special editions go together like fucking cheese and wine. And yeah, it's the old game. But the thing is, once again, they are limiting it, so you can only buy it up to the 31st of March 2021. Now, why is that date important, Bally? It's important because that is the last day of the fiscal year. Nintendo, as many companies do, operate within, quarters and fiscal years and have amounts of money that they must make for their shareholders to be happy and not ask questions about why they aren't on mobile, and why doesn't Mario, for every time he jumps, you have to pay a microtransaction. It was a real question a shareholder asked Nintendo, which some makes me want to rip my eyes out, but hey, that's shareholders for you. They're lunatics. So basically, this game is... Let's just talk about the game quickly. I don't think I'm going to play this, Bally. Obviously, you're not going to play it. This game, when it was remade as Shadow Dragon, I think Shadow Dragon is maybe the worst Fire Emblem game I've ever played. It's ugly as sin. It doesn't play particularly interestingly. It's very vanilla and bland. It's just old and archaic. It doesn't really feel like a good video game. And so the idea that even the remake of this game I thought was bad and outdated... Am I ever going to try the original? Probably not, because if you didn't know, older Fire Emblem games made you do the maths, Bally, which means they didn't give you the forecast of how much damage you were going to do. They gave you a attack rating and a defense rating, I believe, and you had to do the maths in your head of how much damage you were going to do to the enemy before you did it. And I feel like that's
like
something...
Pokemon.
Not in the same way.
Well, like most JRPGs, that your attack or whatever is based on your
the difference with Fire Emblem is like staying alive is really fucking important, and so
That's
like
true,
not having that quick information you have to do every single time you're going into fights. Literally every map a fight is happening every like couple of seconds, right? So it's not like a regular JRPG where you're wandering around an overworld, going to a random battle type deal. So yes, as a game itself, I don't know, do you have any interest in this, Bally, or do you just like, whatever, it's an old Fire Emblem game, I don't need to pay attention to this?
Yeah, it's an old Fire Emblem game. There's a whole lot of modern Fire Emblem I've still not tried that I would be more keen to try first.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, even me, as hardcore as a Fire Emblem person as I am, I doubt I will play this, but the one thing that is maybe stopping me and keeping me in my tracks is, well, it's going to go away, right? And so we talked before about Nintendo and artificial scarcity and how people felt like during the Wii era especially, they were very bad at kind of getting systems out there to kind of... People thought they deliberately held things back to create an artificial buzz that would then create even more success sales-wise. And there are certain Nintendo products that just sell out, right? Ring Fit Adventure, throughout the pandemic, has been a nightmare to get your hands on just because people are inside. It's an exercise thing. It's fun and it's good and people like it a lot, and so it's just keeping up with demand is probably just more on the end of Nintendo just can't keep up with it because supply is limited, versus the deliberate like... And so here's the thing, because someone was arguing this, I think on Kind of Funny Games, at Imran Khan, because he had talked about how he thinks this is stupid, and then people came at him being like, well, did you know that the original Super Mario All-Stars was also a limited time release? Did you know that the one they did on Wii was also a limited time release? And people were trying to use that as an excuse for why Nintendo are doing this now, but I don't think that makes any sense anymore, because not only are they doing it with the 3D All-Stars collection, they've done it with Mario 35, and they're now doing it with another game. And so, like, do you have any thoughts, Bally, as to why this is happening? Does it benefit Nintendo in any way, and how can we deal with it? Like, what message do we send to Nintendo to stop this from continuing to happen?
So I think the one anomaly in my mind is Mario 35. Now let me explain why. Because all the other games are kind of like older games, virtual console games, you would argue in a previous life. And to play devil's advocate, if this is part of a much wider long-term plan that Nintendo are protecting those IP in terms of like demand and how much people want to play Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, Mario Galaxy, Fire Emblem, etc., if they're protecting those with this limited thing in order that they're say the launch of Switch 0.5, they want to relaunch some sort of big virtual console, or they really bolster Nintendo Switch Online with all these other libraries of maybe N64 games, GameCube games, who knows. If it's part of a long-term plan to make sure that service in a year or two's time has more value in their eyes, and there's already reasons why I think that logic doesn't even make sense anyway, but if that's their warped logic on how this works, then I can kind of see why they would want to do it. But I just don't believe that Nintendo have that long-term plan in mind. I think their long-term plan in that sense is much longer term, and they're just thinking about Super Mario Sunshine for the next 15 years, 20 years, not even the next 2-3 years. It's just like their artificial way of adding value in the here and now, and that's what's most concerning. Like, I think that it's very short-termism, and you know, I will eat my words a little bit if they do launch a very impressive service in the next couple of years, but how often did Nintendo suddenly just launch a very impressive service that you can't really see coming, I guess? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think like the theory of, well, they're getting rid of the 3D All-Stars because, hey, in the end of next year, they're going to put out the N64 Switch Online app and it will have Mario 64 on it. I think gets a little bit busted by the fact that the NES Online thing already exists right now, and they could very easily put this Fire Emblem game on that NES Online service. Now, you could argue that the added value of the product is the fact that it is in English for the first time. So that is a new thing, because we have seen releases of stuff like Puyo Puyo Tetris on the NES or Super Nintendo Online service that is straight up just the Japanese version. They've done no work to it. They've just put a Japanese game on there for people to play. And so I could have seen a scenario where they just put the Japanese version of this one on the Switch NES Online service.
Well, they put the Japanese version of Mother 3 straight onto the Nintendo Switch Online.
Right, yeah, but obviously that would require a GBA app, because that's how Nintendo, for whatever reason, have decided this shit works, is they can't even make a singular app where you access both NES and Super Nintendo. They have to be two separate apps for whatever godforsaken reason. So yeah, that's where it kind of breaks down for me. It's like, I don't think that is their long-term plan for Mario 64, because look at what they're doing right now with this Fire Emblem game. It's coming out and is just not on the place you expect it to be. It's being charged as a premium, and as a big, I think part of it is because they're doing a big special edition for it, they feel like they have to sell it as a regular product as well, because if it was just available, it would be even worse if this was like a fucking Hyrule Warriors Scarf situation, where all you get is, you know, you have to go to this one location, this one place in order to get this one special edition, and you can never play the game any other way. And Nintendo have certainly not been above doing that, right? Like, there have been versions of Punch-Out, like Doc Lewis's Punch-Out, that was Club Nintendo exclusive, that you could literally only get by being the platinum tier reward of Club Nintendo in Japan for that year, right? So there are real fucking deep cuts that they've gone there. But I just don't think that's necessarily how they want to operate anymore. It's just, to what degree do we feel that this is a symptom of the pandemic, in that Nintendo have not had a very voluptuous year, let's say, in terms of releases, right? It's quite thin. It is definitely bolstered by Animal Crossing, which is just making cash hand over fist. However, you've also got that propped up by a port of Pikmin, you know, Hyrule Warriors, which I'm sure will do well.
3D World coming start next year.
Yeah, 3D World is coming out, and then obviously the Mario Collection that was 3 old games, right?
There's not a whole lot of brand new incredible stuff in there. And I would even argue, as much as Animal Crossing has sold fantastically well, and that will really bolster them financially, and it was an absolute wild success, still is, I think in an original financial plan, because the fact that it was delayed, it's already probably making up for, you know, previous months that it wasn't out in the world and selling well. So I think that, as successful as it is, there was probably still at least 1, 2, 3 more games that Nintendo have pushed back, or, you know, were meant to come this year. So they might still be taking a bit of a financial hit in that sense. When I say financial hit, I just mean they have still had a massively successful year. It just might not have been as successful as they had forecasted initially.
Right. And you could also argue that gaming and the sector has grown during the pandemic. It's one of the few areas of the world where the numbers are going up, right? Like the bar is going up and to the right, which is what people want in business. And I guess it doesn't necessarily make sense when you think of it from a profitability standpoint, because they have just sold out of Switches. Like, there was a point at which in May or June or even April where people just couldn't even find them in stores because they were just sold out everywhere. Same with Ring Fit, right? Like, even on the software end, they are selling out. So from that perspective, I don't necessarily think that it is a monetary thing or a financial thing, because they've done super well this year. Like, I think the Switch had record-breaking sales in terms of number of weeks at the best-selling console in terms of the US, right? So what is the other reason for this? Like, is there something to be said about them increasing the value of their brand through the idea that they are this limited thing that you've got to get? Or is it just this type of idea that the products they're putting out that have this thing associated with them are not actually that appealing on their own, right? So let's think of a scenario where Mario 35 comes out and is part of the Super Nintendo Switch, it's part of the Switch Online subscription, and it doesn't have a limited time window. Do people flock to play that / new people buy Switch Online memberships, therefore locking them into an ecosystem where they'll probably forget their credit card is tied to Nintendo and get recurring charges for years on end, versus had it not been limited time and people would have had less impetus to just go and get it? Similar with Mario 35. I don't know that we would have picked up Mario 35 right now to play if it hadn't been time windowed, Same with this Fire Emblem game. Is this thing that appealing? No, because as I've said, we've got multiple remakes of it already. This is a very old hardcore style of game that most people are not going to be appealed by. However, by time windowing it, they get people to care about it and to actually pay money for it and to do it almost instantaneously.
That's what I find really weird is why put out something that you're worried is not going to be appealing enough in and of itself that you decide to time window it when you could just put out something more appealing without a time window in the first place?
And I think that's maybe where COVID comes into it here, right? Is that they were forced to put out things that are inherently less interesting, less appealing to a consumer, and as such add this wrinkle to it in order to juice sales from a thing that otherwise may not have made its money back.
Yeah,
or something along those lines. Probably not with Nintendo, because,
companies like Nintendo, they're always going to do whatever they can get away with ultimately. And I mentioned before the show, like, who's more of the fool? Like, the fool or the person who buys the thing the fool is selling? And it's like, people are going to buy this Fire Emblem game probably. We know people are buying 3D Collection. We bought it. I mean, I would caveat that I might not have bought it if we weren't going to do this big celebration that we're doing where we're playing all three games, and I think it's really good for the podcast.
Yeah, I don't think that we really count among a general audience because, number one, we're very hardcore people, and number two, we literally make a show dedicated to these games made by this company.
Right.
Therefore, we have like a
interest
in just doing it. It's almost a business expense to some extent.
Exactly. So we're not a good example, but my point is they're still going to do what they can get away with, and people are going to buy this thing. And I think I'm not massively in favor of voting with your wallet necessarily, but you have to accept that voting with your wallet en masse is how things change within companies. Because if no one tries out Mario 35, no one picked up 3D Collection, Nintendo would be like, well, that was a bad idea. That didn't work. We'll try something different next time, because it will not have made them the money that they need. The fact that 3D Collection is so successful is a little concerning in the sense that they might put out a time-limited Zelda collection next year for its 35th anniversary. And like that could be something that, again, everyone will say, how dare you make it time exclusive? And then everyone will buy it again. And, with our show, we'll probably play all three games and talk about them all individually. So like, I think there is a collective fan base for Nintendo that is always going to just be up for the time-limited thing. And I would argue we've seen it at its worst, especially around stuff like amiibos. Like the incredibly hardcore fans who want to collect these things. Amiibos aren't. I guess everything's time limited to an extent, so amiibos are in a sense, but like
I would say that the best example of this is the NES Classic, right? Because this is a scenario in which Nintendo deliberately made far fewer and also limited the time in which you could buy it, right? And what happened? People were fucking mad. People shouted at Nintendo about it for ages and ages, and eventually, what did they do? They brought it back. The difference is, that's a physical good. This is all digital, and is why it makes even less sense in this scenario, because you can't run out of download codes or the ability to download from a digital storefront. There are infinite...
There is a physical version of 3D Collection, but yes.
Yes, there is, and that's the one I got because it was cheaper. But, you know, those are available for digital purchase. All three of these are available digitally. And so the idea that you are creating this thing that you then just disappear off a storefront is ludicrous, because the thing inherently cannot just not exist anymore. It's not like you need to put it into production to make more of the thing. The thing is just there and will exist so long as it stays there. So I think that's another aspect that just makes this even more crazy, is it's digital and not physical. And that's, you know, because a lot of these Ring Fit, part of the reason it was such a problem was because, again, you have to literally buy the Ring Con to go with it, and those can have to be, you know, produced at a certain limited amount, and there's constraints on that. But there aren't constraints on Mario 35. That's just a fucking file in a cloud, you know?
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know what to do about this, honestly. And I think that ultimately the problem is, you look at the sales, you look at Super Mario 3D All-Stars, and it like outsold everything. It's like past 10 million or something at this point. I think
like third best selling game in the UK for the time period or whatever. Like
yeah.
in the UK, like we're not a Nintendo fan base in the same way.
No, absolutely not. And that's ultimately the problem. Is as frustrating as this is, I think a lot of those people who buy these games don't even know that this is going to disappear in March. You know, like the only people who know that are people like us who are following this stuff closely. And so I do wonder, maybe around that time, do Nintendo hear from a lot of regular people who are like, well, wait a second, why can't my friend has Mario 3D All-Stars, they downloaded it from the shop, why can't I download it from the shop anymore? And I feel like you might get a lot of customer service requests from just regular people who are thinking, what the hell is going on here? Why can't I buy your video game anymore? And that might, to me, be the thing that starts to break the dam a little bit, because, you know, as loud as people on the internet are who are very much into this stuff, it is a tiny, minute fraction of people who are playing video games. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But I don't like it. It feels icky, right? Like it just feels Nintendo are deliberately exploiting the fan base who are so into their stuff in order to get them to buy something that maybe they don't even want to play, for God's sake, right? Like I am feeling the squeeze of like, it's a Fire Emblem thing. I'm a Fire Emblem fan. I should own this, but I don't really want to play it, you know, and I'm not really that interested in it. So
I think more widely, Nintendo are just in a tragically messy place when it comes to retro gaming on Switch. And as you said, it's like one service is the NES Online, and the other one is the Super Nintendo Online. That's it. But there's this one GameCube game, Mario Sunshine, included in the collection, and now suddenly we're getting an NES game on the eShop. It's like, did we think we were ever going to get a Nintendo game, like a Nintendo NES game on the eShop? I just, once the NES Online was there, I never thought that was ever going to happen. So like, it's just very mixed messaging. Every game has like a different situation, and when you look back at like the eShop of the Wii or the Wii U, it was just so much more clear. And as much as it was a shame that, say, there was never ever Game Boy Advance games on the 3DS other than the Ambassador program, or, you know, there was weird anomalies, it was just such a clear system, and those prices were still a little bit gougy for the time, but looking back, it's so much better than the current situation. And like, it's shocking that we have gone backwards in that sense, not forwards.
I don't know that it is inherently worse, just because of those. I mean, it's worse in terms of the number of systems that we have available to us. That's no doubt in my mind.
It's worse in some ways. I agree that the Nintendo, like an annual fee to play all those NES and Super Nintendo games is very cool. I'm a big fan of that. and we had a great time with Wild Guns. It was great.
Right, because I wouldn't have played weird games, you know, as we have done and dipped into and stuff like that. But also, like, I would like to own Link to the Past and Super Metroid and Mario World on my console just out the gate, and you just have them there, which is great. Like, I dip into those games every now and then, and it's neat to have that. So, and we don't have to pay for them again, or even though we are technically paying for them again. This is the problem with subscription services, is everyone says it's free, and it's not, because you're paying a fucking subscription service.
But we've said before, like, one solid 2 to 3 hour session of Smash Brothers that we have online or something is almost already paid for, like, an annual. Maybe not that's an extreme, but we have so much fun out of a solid Nintendo, like, Smash session online that it almost makes up itself. Like, it's a very good deal in that sense.
Totally, and especially with stuff like we're now playing Overwatch on Switch, and I'm sure when Apex comes out, we'll be playing that on Switch as well. So, you know, it's definitely worth it for the online, I guess. But you could also argue we didn't fucking have to pay for online last time, and there's not much of a difference between Wii U online and Switch online, if I'm going to be honest.
I mean, the only difference is the NES games and the Super Nintendo games.
Totally. Yeah, because the quality of the service is certainly as shit as it's always been. If you take a look at Mario Maker, like, Jesus, that's just terrible. It's awful.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I think that kind of does it for a quick conversation about that stuff. I just wanted to kind of get into it a bit because it is a weird one. It is one that is just, I don't know, this year has been strange, and it's just, I think Nintendo decision making has just continued to be a bit out there in terms of what they're doing.
2 years from now, and I say 2 years, not 1 year, because I think 1 year we're still going to be in this weird COVID style, weird Nintendo decisions, who knows what. Let's say 2 years when there's a slightly better chance where things might be a little more normal in terms of people's buying habits on these games and things. Mm-hmm. Is the virtual console situation, the timed exclusive situation, going to be better or worse?
I would just say it will be better, just because we'll be longer into the Switch's life cycle, which means more time for them to put out something like, say, a Game Boy online service.
Game Boy Advance online, yeah. No, I think that's a fairly likely, and I agree, does improve the service, even if it's not quite up to the GameCube N64 heights that we're quite looking for, but we'll get there.
The thing that really just disappoints me the most is every time we do this dance, we have a reset, right? Like, going from Wii to Wii U, it was like, okay, we're going to repopulate the store with all these games again. And then going from Wii U to Switch is like, all right, we'll wait a year until they even try and put these old games on there, and even then it will continue to be the drip feed, you know?
Especially, and I know I'm sounding like a Microsoft fanboy the last few months, but, like, you compare that to what Microsoft are doing going from Xbox One to Series X, and they're just transitioning the entire library pretty much over across, including, like, improving many of those experiences for no additional cost. It's wild.
Like, you could play Knights of the Old Republic now, Bally, or you could play it in 4K on a Series X next year at some point, right? Like, it's stupid.
And the only additional cost I'm paying is obviously the Series X, which for 450 quid, I think it is a pretty good deal for all of that.
Yeah, it is.
Mad.
Mad indeed. But I think that's going to close us for this segment, and that will also close the show. So thank you, everybody, for listening and putting up with our nonsense as long as you have. We'll continue to be here and continue to provide nonsense. You can support that nonsense at patreon.com/thisnintendolife. Bally would like to thank some of our supporters.
Yes, thank you to our $10 tier patrons. They are Zach S., Atari Alex, Thomas, Matthew, and my fiancée Caroline. Thank you all for your support. But thank you also to all of our other patrons. We hugely appreciate the support, especially during this time. And yeah, we put out an episode of This Nintendo Life last week. Definitely worth checking out. And a reminder to anyone who's unaware, we have a show called This Nintendo Life. We talk about everything non-Tendo. And you can download all episodes of that show and get the next shows for a single $1 a month. So yeah, check that out if you haven't already.
Please do. You can also find us on the internet. I am very online, as always, at LordNBZ. That's my Twitter handle, where I get sent takedown notices from YouTube telling me that my content is inappropriate for children, and I'm like, shut up, YouTube. And then I realize the title of the video that they have windowed is "You brought a Darkrai, you fuck." So maybe children.
Are you not allowed to swear in YouTube video titles anymore?
Oh, dude, don't even get me started on what YouTube are doing with that shit right now, because it's not only titles and descriptions, it is literally, they have bots that will go through the video, and if they hear a swear word, then they will take down ads on it and things like that. It's a nightmare right now on YouTube.
They can't just beep you out?
No, they will just demonetize you because you are sweary. Yes, YouTube is a living hellscape.
But did you mark your video as appropriate for kids or not?
I tend to mark mine as not appropriate for the most part, yeah. But that affects monetization across the board, and it is not fun. Anyway, have more fun with me on Twitter by following me at LordNBZ. Bally, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. You can see all of my Hanzo kills on there, although unfortunately
you had a great match with Hanzo.
You can't record replays, although I still
it's such a bummer. I think it's something to do with online with Nintendo Switch, where Splatoon does this and Smash Brothers does this, where if you have a really cool moment, you can't just hold down the button and record.
And also footage. Overwatch is one of those games where even when you're in training, even when you're just looking at statistics, your account is connected online, like it's a permanently online game, which is a shame, but Overwatch makes up for it.
Yeah, exactly. Great. You can follow the podcast Twitter at TNL Podcast, where we shall talk about things that we're doing coming up, all those types of things, have polls, make memes sometimes, all those fun things. And go check it out. You can follow us on all the other places that you find podcasts if you want to download us. We're on Stitcher, we're on iTunes, we're on Spotify. Just find your preferred method, subscribe, listen, and review us on iTunes if you feel so inclined, because that is real helpful, helps the show grow, helps us find new listeners, and all those fun things. And I think that's pretty much it. Maybe
MBZ, everyone's getting hyped for the new consoles, but you know what us Nintendo fans over here at This Nintendo Life are getting hyped for?
Is it the amiibo release of a new Smash Brothers character?
I mean, the fact they are still going is remarkable. But
it's kind of crazy, yes.
Over here at This Nintendo Life, we're hyped to play Super Mario Sunshine.
Oh my goodness, Bally.
For the next celebration of the Mario 3D collection. Obviously, last episode 180, we did a really deep discussion on Mario 64. That was a great episode. It's one of my favorite episodes. Really good time. Really enjoyed making that. We played it Mario 64. We're in the process of playing Super Mario Sunshine, and we will be doing a very deep discussion on Super Mario Sunshine for episode 183. That will come out on Monday, the 23rd of November. So we are putting the call out. Leave a comment in our Discord server. We've got a little Mario 35th anniversary thread on there. Also send us an email to thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. We want your comments, your thoughts. Are you playing Sunshine for the first time? Is it a travesty? Do you have a lot of nostalgia for the game like I do, and you actually think it's kind of good? We want all your thoughts, as small or big as they might be. We want everything, the minutiae.
I think it might be a fun thing if people talk about like specific levels and stuff, because like doing it last time, we were kind of going level by level. So if you want to send in your thoughts on like Noki Bay and how much you hate it, then send it like specific stuff.
Right. We'll do another breakdown level by level. So yeah, that's a good idea. Let's keep up that theming. And so we want your thoughts on Super Mario Sunshine, and we will talk about that. Episode 183, 23rd of November. And if you want to plan far in advance, episode 187, which is not going to come out until the 18th of January in 2021, because we're going to be talking
That's a made-up year, Bally.
We've got a lot of Game of the Year to talk about in between. We're going to have some 2021 predictions. Who knows what they're going to be. But on episode 187, 18th of January, we are going to talk about Mario Galaxy. So if you want to get ahead, you can even jump into a bit of that. But that's a long way away. MBZ, I hear you're going to stream a bit of Mario Sunshine. I look forward to this immensely on those floodless levels.
We'll see. I don't know, because I'm going to be in Edinburgh for a bit, so I probably won't stream any there. But Yeah, we've got time.
Every time a level has the word secret in the title, I get a bit excited. I love it. I love those levels so much.
Yep. You can call it that. You can call it Dread. Either one works.
The secret of Noki Bay. The secret of Bianca Hills. I just love it.
Well, the secret of the next episode of this Nintendo Life will not be unlocked until you listen to it in a couple of weeks' time. That's going to close us out. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us, and we will see you very, very soon. Until then, bye-bye, folks. The musical interludes used on today's show were the main theme from Overwatch, copyright Blizzard 2016, and The Dragon's Silhouette from Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2, copyright Inti Creates 2020.